What has happened since the Council declared the ambition to become a zero-carbon city by 2030? The new Climate Change Committee, which I chair, has been given the job of helping the Council and the city move forwards. We have put aside all party politics and worked purposefully. We agree that to move forward, the City Council needs to know three things: where we are, where we want to be, and to have a plan to get from A to B. The journey from A to B starts with agreeing the amount of carbon dioxide emissions we can emit between now and 2030. To know if the scale of our actions matches the scale of the challenge, we need to measure the carbon cost or benefit of every action we take. You cannot manage what you can't measure. The committee is therefore delighted that we've persuaded the executive that we need to appoint a senior officer and supporting team with expertise in carbon budgeting to help us explore all the options, to develop the path, and then to measure the implementation of that action plan to see that we're delivering what we've set out to deliver. If the budget goes through in March, we will be on our way. With a science-based approach, we will be able to make better, braver, bolder and more informed choices across the Council, in every directorate and in the wider city. Just one example, emissions from transport have barely changed in 20 years. Successive local transport plans have achieved very little. There are dozens of answers to decarbonising transport, from buses run on domestic food waste to trams, monorails, light rail networks and consolidation centres to keep fossil fuel-based lorries and vans out of the city centre. Within weeks of launch, the new tram networks in Dijon and Brest, for example, were both carrying 50,000 passenger journeys a day, and they saw a huge increase in bus use as passengers who'd taken the tram to come into town switched to the bus to make their other journeys. York, on the other hand, is still gridlocked with cars and lorries. We have to be honest. More walking and cycling of itself is not going to create a zero-carbon future. All politicians struggle. Some whose voters can get into town on a bike or on foot in just a few minutes champion banning all cars. Others, whose voters can't get anywhere on a bike in a few minutes, pin their hopes on more efficient diesel buses. The council itself is deeply conflicted. It depends on car parking revenue to fund council services. Was closing a bridge to cars ever going to be an effective substitute for a decent public transport network? And will a voluntary clean air zone be enough to kickstart a zero-carbon revolution? Carbon budgeting will give us the tools to measure the benefits of the various options. But are we prepared to listen to the science? The institutional reluctance to engage with the zero-carbon future is all about money and investment. How do we persuade the city that change is an opportunity and not just a problem? Who needs to be involved in the decision-making? Would a York Climate Commission help? We will either shape our future or be steamrolled by it. To push through the fog of options and possibilities and create a zero-carbon York, we must work together. We must park party politics, we must accept the scale of investment that is required, and we must create a plan together, a vision that is viable and attractive, and then sell it to the people of York.
Okay, so I'm going to start and have the privilege of the first question, and when our panellists have had a chance to answer that, I'll turn to you, the audience, and see what questions you've got. So first of all, I'd like to follow on from Christian's little film and ask our other panellists, is York doing what it needs to do? Who wants to go first?
I've got a mic, so I'll use it. I think, first of all, York's making a start, and obviously the Climate Emergency Declaration and the committee that you've now got, the cross-party committee, it's all a good start. But I mean, I put my life history up on the screen earlier, but I've been in York a long time, and before I got involved in doing all this, I was on the York Environment Forum, along with Christian. And 10 years ago, we produced a document looking at the future of York 2020. So it's, we've reached that point now. When we wrote that 10 years ago, and all of the things that we were looking at then and asking for then, most of them haven't happened. A few of them have, but not very many. And there's a lot of ground to make up really, really, really quickly. But the climate emergency declarations have really changed things in cities and places around the UK, and that's been a real stimulus. So we're starting to do it now, but we've really got to get our skates on.
I'm not going to talk about my own film.
So I agree a lot with Kate. I think the challenge I've kind of got, in a way, to the baselining that's going on in the council. I can totally see that need to plan to get from A to B. But I think there are some maybe obvious solutions, yes, or obvious things that we can address to do with things like household energy consumption, and you talked a lot about the transport emissions, that I think potentially we can be acting on early and still be collecting that baseline data so you can quantify change. But I think there are some solutions for York that we could be addressing now rather than wait to do that collection. And I think York is in quite a nice position in some ways, in that we have got some natural advantages in terms of the layout of the city, the green spaces the city's got, the relative flatness that can promote sustainable transport modes. Those kinds of things give York a positive advantage over some places where it could be even more challenging.
So I agree that York is making a good start. One thing that has hampered efforts, as far as I've been in local government, could you call the left part of the local government, for a massive 8 months now, I think. But as I'm speaking to more and more people about in York and across North Yorkshire, it seems that 10 years ago there was, well, not even 10, I think we're talking 12 years ago exactly, there was money for this sort of thing. And there were plans put in place, and there were officers responsible, and there were networks of officers working together to do this sort of thing at local authorities collaboratively. And then austerity hit, and it got ripped out of council systems. There are a couple of examples across the UK where they managed to they recognised the importance of it, and they held on really, really tightly. And they're the organisations that are now building their own solar farms and, controversially, building Warrington City's solar farm in York and Hull. So enjoy that. So there are an awful lot. Most of the councils in the UK are starting on a back foot, and I think by working together across local geographies, we can really start to, instead of everybody making the same mistake over and over again, we can start pushing it forward quicker and fail fast and get those options out the door as quickly as possible, and do what is going well in other places quicker. And yeah, I know local government especially is not a fast-moving machine, but making sure we can speed that up as much as we can, I think is quite an exciting opportunity.
Thank you. A lot to support what everybody has said so far. Hopefully I can offer a bit of perspective, having done this big tour I told you about and been to a few places. I won't name the place, but somewhere I went to, they only had one cabinet member responsible for environment, and he was also responsible for street scene, neighbourhoods, mental health, and something else. And that's just to show that in York, having, as Christian explained, a committee, senior officers and supporting teams working on this is like the first thing to ask for when I go to places and I do this research to find out what the council is doing to tackle climate change. That's the first question, is anybody thinking about it? And so it's nice to see that there are people thinking about it. And yes, carbon budgeting and making a plan is really, really important. And yeah, then my pitch to you is that you have got people that you can bother and check on about this, and see if these plans come into place and if they are meeting the targets they set. And local councils are really complicated, more so than I realised before I started this project, and I'm sure not loads of people in the room feel really, really confident about how their local council works and who they've got to talk to. But hopefully, yeah, you can go away and find out who your ward councillors are, and as Christian mentioned, talk to them about how these plans will affect you, and how keen you are for these plans to happen, because the plans are all well and good and they definitely need to be made, but as has been mentioned in the film, the political will isn't always there, and that's what you can help shape.
So, James, obviously you're not so familiar with what's happening in York, but I wonder if you know of, are there any places that stand out as examples to you where they've got things moving a bit faster that we can take inspiration from?
In the UK?
Anywhere really, but...
Not really. We're not having the conversations we need to have, which is about how much are we willing to see change in our societies and our communities and our cities, to be really honest about getting to reduce our carbon emissions. There is a bit of a smokescreen, if I may, about net zero going on at the moment. Just this week, the Aviation Industry Board said it's going to be net zero by the middle of this century, and which is preposterous. It's entirely predicated on their ability to suck carbon out of the Earth's atmosphere using negative emissions, or trees, as now seems to be the trees are going to solve everything. Even Donald Trump now has got behind the idea they'll plant a trillion trees and it's job done. It's not. There needs to be so many difficult decisions about keeping the fossil fuels in the ground, because we still make wealth by burning coal, oil and gas, and we still have policies in this country, in this city, and certainly around the world, which is predominantly driven by economic growth and the imperative for growth. And the assumption, and I think it is an assumption that we need to challenge, that people want more. They want more material possessions, they want to consume more material and energy. And I think that's an important assumption that we should push back on, because I don't think it's true. I think what people want is to be happy, and it's not necessarily going to come through a new phone every 6 months.
Okay, let's get some questions from you. Okay, the lady just up here on this.
That's excellent, and I am inspired again to keep campaigning and saying no and having my voice heard, and that's excellent. But what particularly struck me was the idea of having a vision of something better that we could aspire to for the well-being of ourselves and the planet and the creatures on it, etc. So I would just like to slip in here that in the York International Women's Week there is an event called All Change! Which is an open mic for us to get in there in front of an open mic, and through poetry, song, dance, whatever, to say in our hearts, this is what we see as our future, and this is what we're going to work towards. Oh, and it's on the 13th and 14th of March at York St John.
Thank you. Brilliant. Okay, there's a chap up at the back there.
Jeff Beacon, the Pollution Tax Association. I've recently looked at Tim Jackson's estimate of a fair carbon budget. It's about 50 tonnes a person. Okay, he was aiming at 1.5 degrees from the IPCC report, but I think now we're realising that 1.5 is pretty bad. But in the York local plan, they're planning for lots of cars, and also on York Central, and a big car can get through much more than 50 tonnes in its 15-year lifetime, probably sometimes about 80 tonnes, according to Mike Berners-Lee. And I noticed BedZ was put up as one of the slides as an ecological wonder. Well, that had enormous embodied carbon in building it. And unless we're willing to really dramatically change the way we live, and that means dragging town planners in it and stopping the nonsense of our York local plan, and the York Central stuff, we're in a bad way. So 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees, do you agree on the rough size of the carbon budget, and do you agree that building a house is about 80 tonnes and driving an SUV for its lifetime is about 80 tonnes too, which dwarfs everything else? Is this the problem we've really got, or can you give us some hope?
Christian, I'm going to...
I would say that I was re-elected last May, having had 8 years out of politics. What I see as the biggest challenge facing York is a fear of failure, a fear of change, and a fear of investment. And all those things, whether you're talking about developing York Central or you talk, as I was saying earlier, about transport, they require facing up to the scale of investment that's required. The Tyndale Centre requires us to cut carbon emissions by 62% by 2025. It's an extraordinary sum. It requires incredible work. I'm proud that all the councillors signed up to a zero carbon future last March, but if I'm honest, I'd be surprised if more than 2 or 3 of them really understood what that meant. It was just something that had to be said, and it's being said everywhere, as you've pointed out. But it's why, for me, when people come up with a solution, oh, we need a bit more cycling, or people say we need a few more solar panels, it's out of complete proportion to the scale of the challenge that we face. And yet, on a positive note, there are cities all around Europe and around the world making investments to change things dramatically and able to do it. And I believe that York is capable of creating York Central as a zero carbon development, but it requires the will to do it. It requires councillors who are happy to sign up to Let's Be Zero Carbon, and council directorates and corporates directors who are happy to pay lip service to it, but then say don't touch the money. It requires us to make that step change, and I think it requires all of us as residents and members of York to really encourage the city to be bold, to be brave, because the solutions are there. Again, in your film, you pointed out that all the technologies already exist. It's a fantasy to believe that we're waiting for something to happen before we're able to implement change. No, the only thing we're waiting for is our own capacity to say, yes, let's do it.
Am I right to add to that? Totally agree about the 80 tonnes of carbon just for building a house. If you use bio-based materials to build your house, it can be a sequester of up to I think it's up to 35 tonnes of carbon per house. So you get those negative emission technologies that we're talking about. A good one of those is to grow your hemp and make your building out of hempcrete. The LEP are leading an initiative on bio-based and circular construction in Yorkshire, and we're in discussion with York City Council, we're in discussion with York Central about how we can reshape those ambitions, because we acknowledge that embedded carbon is the next big thing that we're going to start really waking up to. So that's definitely on our radar, and like I say, it's as I'm sure you're aware, the beginning of a long journey with all things in planning and development, but those conversations are starting to happen. So and that's looking at creating not only the buildings in the area, but it's specifically using resources that are grown in the area, and then trying to create this manufacturing chain to create the building materials in the area, get the skills for people to actually build locally, and upskilling, working with York College as well on this, upskilling the local construction trades to actually be able to deal with these materials, and sort of taking the whole thing as a holistic industry and moving it all forward as one, rather than previously you would get planners saying, oh, okay, well, this is our design guide, this is what we want it to look like, and then everyone that comes and writes you a piece saying we would like to deliver this housing could just say, oh, well, that's impossible, we can't possibly do that, we'll have to do this, or you won't have anyone to build it. We're trying to put those enablers in at all parts of the chain to try and move it forward as one.
That's excellent, but what about all the cars in York Central and all the enormous number of cars planned in the settlements that the York Plan is proposing?
Before we get too much into detail, I'd like to just give everybody a chance to ask questions. So let's take one more question and then let other people answer. Yeah.
Thank you for the film, for the previous answers. I just have a question about food in York. So this is my 3rd year in York. I live in Tang Hall right now, and we don't have a food bin. And I just want to wonder if that's true for the entire York. Like, where do the food go? Does it go somewhere? Because I used to live on campus, and we did have a food bin, but I think that was only for some colleges and not all. So I'm just wondering, where do the food go in York?
Composting type.
Yeah, some people do, but sometimes it's burned. So yeah.
Anyone got a composting answer?
Perhaps I could answer that.
Yes.
Yeah, over the last couple of days, I've had an email correspondence with Paula Widdowson, who is the Executive Chair for Environment, and I was asking the same question. We compost at home, but I was interested on behalf of other people. And York doesn't have a waste food collection facility. What Paula Widdowson advised me of was that all the mixed waste products goes to the Allerton Park facility, and the organic waste is actually separated from all the other waste using mechanical means. And the organic waste, including food, goes into a biogas facility.
So,
sorry, did somebody say incinerator?
Yes.
Yeah.
They separated.
No, the output then digester then goes into the incinerator and gets incinerated.
The waste gets separated, the organic waste produces biogas, but the rest gets incinerated.
No, the output, the residue of the anaerobic digester also gets put into the incinerator.
So, yeah, go.
Okay. I just touched on in the film what happens in Malmo, and I think that's quite inspiring. I went and made a film there. They collect all the food waste from the city centre, all the apartments, all the houses, terraced houses where you can't put a compost bin. They collect it, they take it to a biogas plant, and half the city's buses are powered by biogas from food waste. The obstacle for us is that buses were deregulated in the 1980s, and so the links between public transport and local authorities are broken. If we can heal that in some way, then we can transform part of that equation that makes better use of waste. I understand that 2 years ago there was a change there was a bus act that gives powers to mayors of combined authorities to engage with these kind of things in different ways. And at the moment, City of York Council is involved in discussions about devolution and mayors and goodness knows what at a government level. For me, one of the potential benefits, if anything like that happened, would be that you would then have someone in place in politics who could transform the relationship between public transport and local authorities and unlock all sorts of transformational shift.
Have we got any more questions from the audience?
Yes. Thank you very much. Firstly, I thought everything was very interesting and I enjoyed it. To a certain extent, I thought it didn't actually hit hard enough, and I didn't think it went deep enough to say just how critical this is. One aspect we keep on coming back to is there's no money to be able to do this. And so you say, okay, well, if that is the fixer, then why don't we take a leaf out of someone like California? California back in 2013 introduced carbon credits. They are saying that actually their carbon emissions by 2030 will be down by 45%. Plus they've also had £500 million worth of money that they can invest into carbon reducing initiatives. Now, if you look at the 20 companies produce 30% of all the CO2 that is in our atmosphere today. And when are we ever going to turn around to them and say, do you know what, actually there's a cost here? Rather than saying to BP, oh, we'll cap all your wells up in Scotland and we'll give you 600 million for doing that. Perhaps we should take a little leaf out of America's book, that when BP put oil all over their beaches, etc., that cost them £8 billion, which they paid quite happily and said, yeah, fair enough, you know, we've polluted your place, we will pay. Carbon credits to me, we produce in Yorkshire 15 million tonnes of carbon every year. From that, if we actually went to the people, or the same people that California have gone to, that would give us somewhere in the region of £2 or £3 million a year, every year, to spend in Yorkshire on cycle tracks, all the other bits and pieces that you want to do. And I just think it's long overdue that we actually did stand up and say, oh, okay, guys, you can now start paying. I understand also that the fossil fuel people, they lobby our government with 200 million quid's worth of backing every year. I don't know what your backing's like, but I'm sure it's nowhere close to what they are, to make sure that their investment for the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years, whatever, is protected. We have to break that. One final thing I'd like to say is I am old enough to remember when a woman having a fur coat was absolutely the top of the line. If you had your mink coat, you had made it. The great world public decided we don't like fur coats anymore, and I think that industry folded up probably within 2 or 3 years. It went from absolutely top of the range to the bottom. That was all about perception. It was a bit like films like that you have made, but everyone getting to see it and understanding this, I have a choice. And as soon as we give that choice, I'm sure the great British public and the great world public would say, it's enough, but we have to get over that.
Thank you. So I'm just going to give everybody on the panel a last opportunity to say one more thing. So perhaps you could just say what you think the most powerful thing is that we could do now, either as an individual or what we need to be asking for of those who are making decisions.
Sure. I think this is still on. Great. Yeah, thank you for those points. I thought they were really interesting. And yeah, on the lobbying side, I don't know if anyone saw one of the new MPs, she's called Zara Sultana, she tweeted that she'd just been sent a gift box full of fairly random things, but from Heathrow Airport. And it's one of the small examples of the kinds of lobbying that MPs get. And yeah, I guess I'm kind of here tonight to try and encourage you to be the people in your MPs and your councillors' offices to talk about climate change, and that you do want to see action happening. In the film it mentioned that we really need to kind of change this conversation to make sure that climate change isn't just a thing for lefties, and that hope for the future, that's the biggest dynamic that we encounter. Most politicians see that we're talking more about plastic, see that we're talking more about climate change, but and as part of my job I've interviewed a lot of them and gone to meet with them. They still don't believe that the average person really cares enough about climate change to merit this action. They think that they will get a backlash when, you know, the kinds of actions that we need really happen. But they're fed up of talking to lobbyists. Like, they see it for what it is for the most part. And my overwhelming experience has been that when quote-unquote normal people go and talk to their representatives, they love it, they really appreciate it, and a few conversations can make a really, really big difference. And yeah, on the money side, yeah, councils are very, very short of money, but there are also ways of making money. You might have heard of the workplace car parking levy in Nottingham City Council. I won't bore you with the details, but they raised £300 million, which has paid for their electrified tram network, which is now the most well used in Europe. And that was them making money to implement that system. So yeah, I will pass on to other people. Please do get in touch with us at Hope for the Future if you'd be interested in working with your councillors or your MPs. But yeah, a message basically that you do have a lot of power within these systems.
Okay, so first of all, I'd say I've been really inspired by the level of knowledge amongst a lot of people in the audience. So one of the things I'd say is those people that know things or have found things out, to share that as widely as you can with as many people, to start changing the mindset of people. In terms of the difference or the changes you can make, I think some of them were in the film. So thinking about your diet, and small shifts in your diet can make a large difference to the emissions that your lifestyles are creating. And then the sort of raise of positivity, the transitions that we heard about with fur coats. If you think about the way opportunities for changes in transport that are emerging, not just electric vehicles, but other mobility solutions like electric bicycles that can change the mode that people are using, usually in a positive way, in all sorts of directions, that don't necessarily totally derail your lifestyle, but can very much reduce your emissions quite rapidly. And then the other thing I think, in terms of positivity around this, is I talked about well-being in my opening slide, and I think the challenge with the climate emergency is it can be very scary for people and actually undermine mental health and well-being. But a lot of the solutions to lifestyle changes that are being identified are things that are actually very low carbon, but much more to do with having sociable lifestyles, engaged with things like volunteering and things that bring joy into your lives but don't actually cost a lot of carbon necessarily. So those future lifestyles will be different, I'm sure of it, and probably different in ways that could be quite challenging, but also there's positive solutions around this that can actually improve people's well-being and lifestyles. So that's all I'm going to say.
Is it my go?
Your go.
Companies will start paying for their carbon pollution when they start paying their tax. It's not difficult. We know exactly what needs to happen. They need to start paying for their impacts. The most powerful thing that we can do is obviously tell everyone to visit www.climateracefilm.com and show the film. And beyond that, it's to believe that we can actually do this. I meet too many people who have just given up. I had to write something this week about no, human extinction is not required to avoid climate change. Right? There is absolutely everything that we have right now to avoid dangerous climate change. We're not going to turn the climate on a sixpence, but there's no reasons why we have anything locked in beyond 1.5 or 2 degrees Celsius. The thing that is stopping us is political, social, cultural, economic will. So that's the hardest thing, right? Because it requires change. So the most important thing that we can all do is believe that we can actually do this. We have the solutions, and we have the solutions within ourselves. I don't think there's anything necessarily fundamentally flawed with Homo sapiens. There's no reasons why we can't reorder our societies, make some relatively modest changes to our lifestyles. I'm not telling you to go and live in a yurt, right? I'm telling you we need to make progressive and connective changes, and then to demonstrate those changes with the people that you talk to, your family, your friends, push for change in your workplace, really do that business of polycentric governance. It's not just about banning plastic straws. It's not just about not going on holiday by using an aircraft. It is all those things, right? And it is talking to your local councillors. It is talking to your MP. It is being that agent of change within your organisation and in your community. And when you begin to do that, you realise maybe there's nothing more important you could do with the rest of your life. It's actually something you want to do. It's a positive vision. We need to get more people into this collective endeavour, and we really can see transformative change. I think it's going to be wonderful.
Thank you. So I just wanted to pick up on something you said there about being that agent of change and writing those letters to your politicians. Generally, there will be people who say loud things about how much that district heating system is going to create noise and light pollution, and they will drop flyers around all of their local area, and they will put in loud, repeated issues to the planning authorities, and they will get the progress that we are looking for cancelled. So the idea that we need to match those people, those NIMBYs, not in my backyards, we need to match those people with the same amount of positive voice, because politicians are afraid of backlash, and when they've got the only people speaking loudly at them are the ones that are saying, do not build that solar farm, they are going to not build that solar farm. So we need to match that level of volume with activism. An example of that in the city of Ghent was that they redesigned their transport system so that cars basically couldn't go from one segment to the other around the city. They had to go, if they wanted to go to the next segment, they had to go out to the outer ring road and back in again. It's not getting rid of cars completely, it's just making it blooming awkward. And the mayor of Ghent got death threats, and they were thinking about ways to do this, and they said, look, we know it's the right thing to do, we're going to do it overnight on a Sunday, and it's just going to be done. The guy got voted back in with an even bigger majority next time round, because yes, there will be people that will send you death threats, but most of the people will go, oh, that was an excellent idea. Oh, I wish I'd have known about that and could have lobbied for it and shouted loudly about how great that is. So that sort of keeping that, being aware that you can be the person that pushes this thing over the line is really exciting. I know we're running late on time, just wanted to touch on the finance side of things. Yes, there's lots of problems with the economic system at the moment. However, globally, $200 billion have been invested in green bonds in 2019, and the Financial Times front page recently was that there are £900 billion in stranded assets in the fossil fuel industry, and slowly but surely finance is waking up to the fact that they're not going to be able to keep digging fuels out of the ground, and they have valued £900 billion of stranded assets that now companies and financial institutions are very, very quickly divesting in. They're ripping their money away from these institutions and looking for new places to invest it, which is why we're trying to work together to build a structure to get them invested in green projects in Yorkshire.
That's great. I can follow on from that. I'm really pleased with that. I would say use your voice in letters to the press, to MPs, to councillors, to give the council the courage to invest in the right things and to make money from tackling climate change, not contributing to it. We've heard that councils are kind of hard up and whatever. Yes, there is a reality to that, but we also have to remind ourselves we're in a wealthy country and we're in a comparatively wealthy local authority, and to plead poverty as a reason to not tackle climate change is unacceptable. We have about £600 million invested in the pension fund for this city. Southwark last year diverted £65 million from its pension fund away from fossil fuels and towards renewable energy. I would like this council to do the same. You can help by coming to the Climate Change Committee and demanding it when we next meet, because we're discussing divesting away from fossil fuels next month. Another area would be that the City Council has a £60 million commercial property portfolio. What are we investing in? How could we invest it better? What changes can we make to be part of the solution and not part of the problem? In that context, you may be aware that in the past 2 weeks the Council announced it was going to be investing in Castle Gateway development to transform Piccadilly. The position of the Climate Change Committee is that development should be passive house standard or not be built. It's absolutely imperative, if we're going to hit a 2030 zero carbon target, that the Council leads by example. Again, you can make your voices heard and give the Council the courage to do the right thing. And I hope that you'll be enthused by what you've heard today to be proactive and to help us do better.
What is the date and time of the meeting?
It's in the middle of the month on a Tuesday. Is it the 14th? Is it the 16th? At 5:30. But you can find it easy on the council website. On the 10th, you see, I don't even know that. So it's the 10th, a Tuesday, 5:30.
You've all said so much of the things that I would say. which is great. And the point about finance, I just really wanted to emphasise that. And just someone asked Kate, we were asking about examples in the UK, and I really haven't had the chance to talk about what we're doing in Leeds. But Leeds has really been making great strides, and as I say, I work for the Leeds Climate Commission, which is a citywide partnership. It's a collaborative approach between the private sector, the public sector, and if you like, the third sector. And we work with the council, but it's actually also it's independent from the council. And if you like, in fact, it was described the other day as it's a live experiment in kind of innovative kind of other forms of governance, which I think is really interesting. So we're talking a lot with businesses and organisations, and lots of stuff is happening. But the finance thing is really important, and we know because we're having more and more talks with business people, and investors are coming to us and saying, what can we invest in? Because that they're really actually crying out for low carbon projects to get involved with, because they're divesting. So that change is really happening. And the other thing I just wanted to say about Leeds is, since they declared a climate emergency, which was March last year, the first thing we did was held this big Leeds climate conversation, which went on for 6 months, and there was an online survey. They had 8,000 responses to the survey, but they also went out across the city and engaged at, I think, over 80 events, and I was part of that as well. We did focus groups. We also ran a Leeds Climate Change Citizens Jury. That was something that the Climate Commission actually organised, and I think the experience of that, and there's obviously a UK climate assembly going on at the moment, is that we had such a diverse group of people who weren't involved necessarily in climate change. Some of them were even sceptics. But at the end of it, they came out with a united voice with a set of proposals for the city. And the key message they really emphasised was that every action counts. That I just think is just so important. And in fact, our council is now putting that on billboards around the city. But the Citizens Jury has also said we want progress reports every 3 months, and we want to hold you to that. But the point is, it's not just the council, it's the city. What is the city? Well, it's all of us. And also the thing that came out of the Citizens Jury was the real pride and sense of belonging to a place that unites us all, whatever our politics. And going back to what you've all said, particularly about relationships, politicians, so I think it's a really good place to start. So, we just get stuck in.
Okay, I'm hoping that everybody's feeling really inspired and energised and wanting to go and do stuff. And tonight we've got 7 local organisations, representatives from 7 local organisations here, our own start of polycentric governance. And they're ready to talk to you about their organisations. They'll be just outside in the foyer as you leave. So if you want to get involved in something, whether it's improving buses, improving cycling, working with Extinction Rebellion, getting community energy, helping at a nature reserve, have a chat with the people outside, and let's get York moving. Meanwhile, I'd like to thank YESI for organising and hosting the event. Alice and Robin, thank you very much. And a really big thanks to all of our panellists who've taken the time to be here today, and to James for travelling up from Southampton specially and inspiring us with this fantastic film, and to all of you in the audience for turning out and coming to see it. Thank you.